Hello everyone, and welcome to this new video tutorial for Maverick Render. In this tutorial, we'll learn how to create an exploded view of your products. We'll start with a simple example to explore the various options, and then move on to a more complex example. In this example, we have 4 cylindrical primitives. First, we'll create an explode motion controller. Next, we'll create an assembly with all the objects we want to control using the explode controller. We drop the motion controller onto the assembly. On the timeline, we position ourselves at the final frame and configure the Z-axis position to create movement, just like we would with a transform motion controller. By scrubbing, we can see the resulting animation. However, we want each primitive to move a different distance to simulate the exploded effect. To achieve this, we use a series of custom attributes, which are object properties that act as multipliers. In this case, we'll use custom attribute 1. Since we're working with an assembly, we select the option in the common rollup to affect all the children of the assembly. Now, we'll select the objects one by one and adjust the value of custom attribute 1, which will act as a multiplier. Values less than 1 will make the object move a shorter distance than the final value of the motion controller. We configure the objects one by one in the order we want them to move, assigning higher multipliers to the objects we want to move farther. If we scrub through the timeline now, we'll clearly see the effect, simulating the exploded view in our assembly. If we change the general translation value in the motion controller, we'll see that all objects move proportionally. Remember, you can use easing options like with other motion controllers to set up a ping-pong effect. By playing the animation and adjusting its duration, you can review the final result. We encourage you to experiment with different types of easing to see how they affect the movement. Once the translation effect is set up, you can add a rotation. By making adjustments and checking the effects with scrubbing, you'll get an idea of this effect's potential. If you want to use a different multiplier for the rotation, you can use custom attribute 2. Initially, the effect will be the same for all objects because we haven't modified custom attribute 2. By going to the object properties and changing the values, you can achieve separate effects for each object. You can also create a new explode motion controller to control and modify another movement separately. Now, let's move on to a more complex real-world example to put these techniques into practice. We'll use the Fuji camera lens model, and you can see the intended result in the final video. Notice how the parts separate beautifully. The first step, especially when working with complex scenes, is to organize it in the best way possible. In this case, we've separated the objects into different assemblies for the upper and lower parts. This makes it easier to identify the order in which to configure the custom attributes. We start by creating an explode motion controller and dropping it onto the upper assembly. We shorten the motion controller on the timeline so the movement lasts only 30 frames then move to a final frame. Now we configure the Z-axis translation value to set the maximum movement for the explode effect. Scrubbing through the timeline, we see all the objects moving simultaneously. We enable the Affect Assembly Children option and use custom attribute 1 as the multiplier. Next, we adjust attribute 1 for each object in order, depending on how much we want each part to move. We start with part 4 and work back to part 1, which we leave unmoved. Since the result of the final frame is shown in real time, you can make adjustments as needed. In this case, we'll change the order of some parts by varying their multipliers. Now we can readjust the final translation in the motion controller and scrub to view the effect, which matches our expectations. Next, we create another Explode motion controller and drop it onto the lower assembly. This time, we'll set the translation value to a negative number so the objects move downward. We can check the translation value from the other Explode and copy with a negative value to ensure perfect symmetry. As usual, we enable Affect Assembly Children and start configuring the custom attributes. Part 9 will stay in place with a multiplier of 1, and the subsequent parts will have lower multipliers to move shorter distances. Remember, you can adjust the slider more slowly and precisely by holding down the Control key and using the mouse wheel. Scrubbing through the timeline now, we can already see the final result. We set the final animation duration and use play. Next, we'll add a ping-pong effect so the movement returns to its original position. We enable it in the easing options, just like with the other Explode. We continue playing the animation, reviewing the result, and making adjustments. If we add an ease out effect to each Explode, we'll see the movement pause midway before returning. Now we can adjust the total animation duration and move one motion controller after another. You can create various effects depending on your imagination. Additionally, you can configure a custom profile for the easing to fine-tune the effect further. With this, the movement will start quickly and slow down much more gradually. Experiment and play around until you achieve your desired effect. We hope you've learned how to use this fantastic motion controller and apply it creatively to your products. That's all for now. See you in future videos. Have fun with Maverick.